Mastering new washes to paint a picture.
Take everything we got, give it an honest shot, turning it on and off, we've been sliding, riding the highest dream.
Welcome, I'm Elisa, mom of 3 and fine art watercolors. If you're new to this channel and you would like to learn how to paint fine art watercolors, learn about the best supplies, and watch some speed painting, start now by subscribing, clicking the bell so you don't miss out on anything. Everyone who takes up watercolor needs to master the basic flat wash. However, it has its limits. You need to master other wash techniques to paint a picture. So today we are going to learn how to tint a background, paint wet on dry, and dry brushing. All are very important techniques. Without further ado, let's go paint. You want to spray your paints. Use the dropper to add water. We'll use cobalt blue, cad red light, and yellow ochre. First we want to tape our paper down and mark off 4 sections. I'm just using the back of the paper that I used from last time. You can do the same if you want to save on paper while you're doing lessons. So if you want to create a flat wash from your wet on wet, you just get your paper wet, wait until the paper just loses its shine, then you can go in just like we did before, going horizontally across your paper, creating that flat or even a gradated wash. What we're going to do today is actually create a mingled wash. We're going to add different colors and let them blend together. This will be the best thing when you're trying to create a sky. You want to do wet on wet and add your colors and let them blend. So I'm going to use yellow ochre, then I'm going to go into a little bit of my cad red light there, creating our variegated type of wash. You can see how the colors are blending and mixing together. And the last color I will use is a cobalt blue. Wet on wet and wet on dry are both variations of our last washes, which I will link in the card above. Depending on how light or dark you want your wash, depends on how much pigment you will add to your wash. We will dry up these edges so no excess paint will get in. Here we're creating a nice mingled wash for our wet on wet. So you want wet paper and then you will add your wet paint to create your wet on wet. I really like this going on here. It's very fun. And if I don't want something, I can really quickly, because it's both wet, I can actually go in and lift a little bit of that out because both the paper and the paints are wet. Now we are going to move on to our wet on dry, which is just as it sounds. You're going to use wet paint on dry paper. So very similar to what we did in our flat and gradated and variegated washes. But generally we're going to use this to just place our paint exactly where we want it on our paper. So if we're going to do a tree, we're going to start off with our sky here. So I'm going to go back into my cobalt blue, create your flat or even gradated washes, whichever you choose to have. And then you're going to go around your tree. And doing the wet on dry technique will help you with being able to go around this tree so much easier because it's not wet, so your watercolors will not go where the water isn't unless you put it there. So this allows you to have much more control over your paint, where it goes. Quickly do that. so it's all flat. I'm going to let this dry and then I will continue to show you how to do the tree with wet on dry. When you tint a background, essentially you are changing the color of your paper. So instead of white, I want it to have either a warm or cool mood to your painting. So if you want it more bright and more romantic feeling, you can go with a very pale yellow. You can even go with a very pale red, but you just very lightly put a wash of color and let it dry. If you want something that is more harsh or cold feeling to it, maybe it's a winter painting, maybe it's raining and sad, then you would create a very pale blue background. Or you can do a very pale red. Then you can go back over and start your painting, and it will influence the feel of your painting. I don't do this very often, but occasionally I have. Okay, we'll start here and we'll go into some sap green for our grass down here. So for wet on dry, you take your paint onto dry paper and you add it where you want. This is perfect for layering. So to layer it, you would wait till that dries. Then if you want it darker, if you want to add a blue, you can do that. I also want this sap green to go in our tree, though I'm gonna have to be very careful because it is wet right there. It's okay if it blends a little bit, but I don't want it to blend too much.
Hold on tight, it'll be alright.
I'm gonna get a smaller brush so I can get this tree branch down here. I'm going to go into burnt sienna to create the branches of my tree, the trunk. Now let's see, this was still a little wet, so it did bleed a tiny bit in there. When painting on figures or animals or even buildings, this is mostly where I would use my wet on dry. Wet on wet I use mostly for skies or for the sea. Anything you want to have a more loose feel. I've used it in hair. Now this part has dried. I want it to be a little darker. See how much more control I have over my wet on dry. I'm going to darken up this as if the sun is coming down here. So we have the lighter color here. So I'll darken my green up by adding ultramarine blue to my sap green. It's just a little bit darker shade. And this would be the underside of the tree. Any part maybe where there's shadow. And you could keep layering this as much as you would need to get the effect you want. On a few little leaves just outside of the tree. And then we'll have a shadow here from our tree. And I will darken up my shadow on my tree trunk by using a burnt umber. So again, on the underside of my trunk, where it would be in the shade. That's very important to know where your light source is coming from, otherwise it won't look right. So there's a simple little tree. You could even add more yellow to the top part if you wanted. I'm just gonna leave it like this. Dry brush is a very different technique than any of these. You are going to use more pigment than water. I'm gonna use this red. So you want just a little bit of water in your brush and more pigment. And generally, anytime I'm dry brushing, I will practice on a test sheet before I ever go onto my paper. You don't always know if you have a little bit too much water or not enough water. That is great. So we're just gonna create some lines here. And see how you get these white little specks. This is where the paper is not picking up the paint. And this is perfect if you're wanting to create maybe the bark of a tree, rocks. It's great for the little sparkles of light on water. Maybe on a building you just want a little bit of texture. I'm gonna go into a blue here, cobalt blue. You see how the texture varies, and it's a beautiful effect. And your paper generally is a rough paper, which is why it can create this technique. It doesn't work as well if you have completely smooth paper, if you have a hot press paper. We will pick up those edges and let it dry. If this video was helpful, give it a thumbs up and keep practicing so you can master those washes. Question of the day: were these washes harder or easier than you thought they would be? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when I post a tutorial on how to apply these washes in a painting. And until then, keep on painting.